Hey, how's it going? It's John Suntress, and welcome to Word Balloon. You found us. That's excellent. If this is your first time, please consider subscribing to us via iTunes or Stitcher or certainly Last.fm and all the various places you can find podcasts. Word Balloon is invariably there. Subscribe. Please let me know what you think of the show. Write ratings over at Apple's podcast platform and give me a review. You can say nice things, you can say lousy things. You suck, John, and let me tell you why. Happy to hear your feedback either way. But do me a favor and like me where you can and leave comments. And also, as always, email me, john@wordballoon.com. I'm interested in your feedback. I'm interested in what you're thinking about the content that I put here. Also, I have a YouTube channel under Word Balloon. Would you please consider subscribing there? I've got about 400 plus subscribers currently. I'd like to get to at least 1,000 and start generating more video content. So go to YouTube and click on the Word Balloon channel and please subscribe.
Terrificon, Connecticut's biggest Comic-Con, returns to Mohegan Sun, August 9th to the 11th. Meet Billy D. Williams, Val Kilmer, Doctor Who's John Barrowman, and the voices from Animaniacs and Thundercats. New England's largest guest list of comic book artists from DC and Marvel Comics is at Terrificon on August 9th to the 11th at Mohegan Sun. Tickets on sale now at Terrificon.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. As promised for the weekend, Jerry Ordway. Jerry's a great writer and artist. He was one of the Superman creators during the whole Death of Superman and the period of the John Byrne, Marv Wolfman era. We talk a bit about that. He just released a new comic book with his longtime collaborator, Roy Thomas. It's a Captain America special that came out on the 4th of July, or July 3rd, really. But it was an Invaders story, and in a sense it was a first Invaders story when they all got together, and very reminiscent of the work they did together on All-Star Squadron back in the day, and Jerry's a longtime Justice League, or I should say Justice Society fan. But we go into a whole bunch of directions, and that's great because Jerry's just a few years older than me, and we talk about some of the nerd stuff that we've always loved. A great long conversation with Jerry Ordway on today's Word Balloon. All brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your great support via Patreon. If you like Word Balloon and you want to subscribe, Word Balloon's free. It'll always be free. But if you want to help out the cause, you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon. Click on the Patreon ad at wordballoon.com. That'll get you there as well. Thank you for your support, League of Word Balloon listeners. And this Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. They're having a great year, man. There's no doubt about it with some of the new books that have debuted this year, like Dark Red from Tim Seeley and Stronghold from Phil Hester, things like Joe Pruitt's horror anthology Shock, and there's also new books on the way like Cullen Bunn's Knight's Temporal. Chris Sabella's Trust Fall just started last month. Matthew Klickstein has You Are Obsolete. These are tremendous, genre-busting books that I think you'll appreciate. And as I've said before, in the wake of losing Vertigo, isn't it great that Aftershock is there to pick up the slack with some of these fantastic books? Now, in the weeks ahead, we'll have more talks with Aftershock creators about their books, but you don't have to wait. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Okay, without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Jerry Ordway. Nice, breezy conversation about the things we love, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Jerry Ordway on Word Balloon. Jerry Ordway, welcome back to Word Balloon. Like I was just telling you, man, I'm psyched to see you in a couple of weeks at Terrificon in August.
Hey, thanks, John. Sounds fun. It's actually closer than I think Mitch just told me. It was like a month away. So
it is like, a month away. Yeah, I know.
Get ready.
Absolutely, man. Hey, how's your podcast going with Mitch?
We haven't done it in a couple of weeks because I was at Heroes Con, and then I was on a wedding vacation kind of family thing. Mm-hmm. So we haven't. I think he's filled in with other people, but yeah, I think we did what we actually. It's funny because we were doing them fairly casually. Obviously, we'd go for pizza, and it's like, hey, it's kind of quiet in here. Let's do the podcast. What are we going to talk about? I don't know. We'll come up with something.
Celie and I, we've been doing lunch podcasts for a while, and we were going to do one at this Italian restaurant, but the jukebox was so loud. I'm like, oh, I don't want to get like nailed for playing music without the copyright and everything. So we went back to his house and we recorded and stuff.
Yeah, it's always good to find a nice, relaxing, quiet place. But sometimes the energy, if the pizza place we were at, we had a regular waitress for probably 2 years who knew exactly what we were going to order. She always had a Blue Moon, ready for me when I came in. But so that she actually jumped into the podcast a little bit, and Mitch had to cut a little bit more out because it was a little too
salty.
No, well, I don't know. I think it was just off the beaten path. It's like we're talking comics, and then suddenly we're talking about just weird esoteric stuff that maybe he made a decision on.
See, I always welcome as I was telling, I talked to Mike Cronenberg today, who does a lot of work at Tomorrow's for their books and stuff, and he has 2 dogs. He's like, I'm worried the dog's going to bark. I'm like, I'm cool with barking dogs. I'm cool with a crash in the house. I'm like, don't worry about it. Unless you don't want it in there, I said, it's fine with me. I believe in whatever happens during the conversation is fine. So,
I remember I was listening to your interview with Carl Kiesel, and I was thinking at one point he might have burped or something. But it might have just been a hiccup. And I was thinking, oh, okay, well, I guess I better not have a beer before I do my...
That's fantastic. Oh, man. I should collect that. Odd body noises from comic creators. That would be good. That's its own podcast. And now the Carl Kiesel burp. Here we go. It's like very Python-esque.
Right, you could just create a little disc of sound effects.
That would be great, man. That's hilarious. Hey,
do your horror movie scream, and then have like Brian Bendis does his horror movie scream.
That works for me. I like that. And it's fine because it just came out Wednesday. I was hoping to talk to you about the Captain America Invaders special you did with Roy. That was great.
Oh yeah, it was fun to. I actually kind of snuck up on me. I think I didn't really even look at previews closely enough, and then somebody mentioned, it's out right before the 4th of July, and I was like, well, that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was cool. I actually read it for the first time. We had worked plot style.
Oh.
So it wasn't full script, but his plot was very complete, and I just kept thinking, well, I hope I leave enough room. I hope I leave enough room, because in the past, obviously, Roy always has more to say than sometimes there's space to say it in the. Especially on All-Star Squadron, there's too many characters, basically, like 20 characters all getting a line. So I was looking at it. I guess I bought it on Wednesday, and then I was reading it Friday night, and I was like, "Wow, this is good." It's good. It was, basically nothing's overwhelming, so that was good, because you always in those days with plot style you always try to leave at least a third dead space in a panel so that the balloons can go. And I always like the balloons to go up high, because generally if they're covering somebody's back or something, it feels like wasted drawing,
Sure.
So having not done a plot, style thing for a while, because most of the stuff I've gotten has been full script, and, it's a different way to work. You have to plan in for space. You also have to plan in for who's talking first and who has a double balloon, and is he going to be on the left? Is he going to be on the right? How the balloons connect. I'm always planning this stuff. So the editors like that, because they know that the balloons will all fit when they work on something with me. But with plot style, you really have to just leave space and hope that the writer writes to the space, and rather oh, I want this guy to speak in this panel. It's like, well, that's not what plot style is about.
Sure.
So it's just a little bit different. It's a different way of working, and I really prefer it, because it does. I think it frees you up in a way. I don't have to worry about the logistics of word balloons or whatever. Especially now, since I guess really the Tom Orzechowski style that Claremont and Tom had kind of developed on X-Men, where you had multiple word balloons within the same panel. You could have a whole conversation. Mm-hmm. And the balloons would just hopscotch over each other, but the pointers would, connect back to the original speaker. Well, that style has become so, I think, tied to the computer lettering, because it's obviously easier for them to do it that way, because they can move stuff around. If it doesn't fit, they can, They can kind of somehow make these really complicated back and forth conversations work. But it's hard for me as an artist to try to plan that out. And then, again, it's almost like a very technical thing that has less to do with the creative aspect of drawing and more with, just some kind of, I guess, just making space for something and making sure something works or whatever. But but it's a different part of your brain, I guess, working on that as opposed to just coming up with, interesting angles for characters or stuff,
Yeah, I thought it turned out great, honestly. And is that the first time you've done all the Invaders, or even Captain America? Forgive me, I don't have your bibliography up to see.
Yeah, no, I did Captain America in the late '90s. I drew an issue with Dan Jurgens. He wrote a issue set during a D-Day battle, and it was one that had a flashback to Captain America and Bucky. It was just super fun.
Sure.
I always liked drawing the character when I was a kid. I loved drawing Captain America. I worked on I did a couple issues of Avengers, the Avengers and stuff. I mean, I've drawn the characters. I was trying to remember, though. I'm pretty sure I had never drawn the original Human Torch.
Jim Hammond, yeah.
And I'm also thinking I have very limited experience. I think I might have inked a couple of panels with Namor, in the old days, but nothing to drawing him. So it was kind of fun. It was also fun to be, to realize Marvel still has some kind of continuity. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way.
I know what you mean.
I just assumed that, everything was thrown up in the air and where it landed, was all new. But
they keep pushing everything forward, and I understand. I mean, Tony Stark went from being in Vietnam to Iraq or whatever with Extremis, with Warren Ellison and Nadi Granoff and everything. So, yeah, things do kind of shift and move, and I do understand.
This story actually, they actually build off of, like, the first, I think, 4 or 5 pages builds off of a Captain America special that Roger Stern and John Byrne had done back in the 80s. It might have been, like some anniversary issue.
Oh, that's great.
America.
That's excellent.
So, yeah, that was kind of cool. And so Roy was able to fill a space bracketed by that story from the 80s and his beginning of his Invaders. So he basically carved out, like, here's the perfect time for the story to happen. Here's where Roosevelt really was during that time. I mean,
yes.
That's because Roy loves history,
yes.
and he was able to take that, just a couple of elements and say, okay, here's my story. And it's, that's kind of how you do it. But the cool thing is that it's not a story about nothing. It's actually a story that's kind of, I think enhanced by the real world qualities, of the plot, the subject, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor.
Absolutely, Edward and Mrs. Windsor. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or I forget if that's what her name was. Whatever the woman.
It was Wallace, I think.
Wallace. Yeah, Wallace Simpson.
Yeah.
I want to say.
Yeah.
I love that stuff, man. Did you watch The Crown on Netflix?
No, I actually I didn't. I heard it was really good.
It's amazing.
It's kind of like Downton Abbey and things like that. I think I have an interest in it, but there's just so much stuff on that you wind up going, okay, I'll get to it someday.
Well, I'm always much like, honestly, both All-Star Squadron and Invaders. I loved The Crown because it is real-world events. And mentioning King Edward and and also his wife, Wallace Simpson, they play a good role in the first season in particular, and in a couple episodes. And it's I'm fascinated by that whole period, even the King's Speech, obviously that film as well. And this writer who also did the Helen Mirren film The Queen of Elizabeth when Diana dies. This guy really gets it. I just think he really, because I'm with you on Downton Abbey. I know it's a quality show, but I mean, we grew up on Upstairs Downstairs, so it's like for me, I was like, yeah, I've already been through this, man.
I was going to say Dark Shadows.
No vampires in Downton Abbey. Maybe that's what
I think Dark Shadows was the only soap opera that I ever watched.
Oh man,
I think of like those other ones as well done, but ultimately soap operas. But not that there's anything wrong with it, because obviously the Marvel age of comics was pretty much a soap opera with 100%. Superheroes thrown in. You know?
Absolutely, man. God, Dark Shadows. All right, you're making me stop for a second. Every now and then, when it's on Decades, that digital channel, I watch it. And I mean, I was a really little kid, and I know we would stop playing whatever we were doing, and we'd all run to somebody's TV and watch Dark Shadows. And I was one of those kids behind the couch, scared out of my mind.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, what's funny, though, I think when Netflix first started their streaming service, they had Dark Shadows on, and I had not seen it since I was a kid. Like probably, I guess I would have been maybe 9 or 10 at the most.
Okay.
Maybe closer to 9, I guess. But I remember watching it after school, coming home from school, and like, oh, it's on Dark Shadows. And it was the funny thing. I watched maybe about 40 episodes on Netflix, and I realized it was just like, wow. When I was a kid, I thought this was so crazy. As an adult, it was all tease. There'd be like a whole half hour of it or whatever it was tease for the next half hour, but nothing really ever happened.
You're right about that. The movies freaked me out. Both House of Dark Shadows and I forget what the name of the other one.
Wow, I don't think I even saw those.
Oh man, they're like.
I guess I need to. Need to catch those.
Well, Barnabas is in the first one, and I believe the werewolf character, and Quint
was that David Selby?
Yeah, David Selby's in the second one. Yeah. David Selby, excellent character actor who did a good job playing Commissioner Gordon's voice in the Batman Year One animated movie.
Oh, that's funny. And I was just watching Mad Men. I've watch it over every couple of years.
I understand.
I'm up to season 3, and there he was on an episode, and I was like, hey, David Selby.
That's cool. Yeah, he's a real interesting look, and those eyes and everything. He like Michael Sarrazin. Those kind of crazy eyes or whatever. Yeah. And I remember that. You're right. There was just a tremendous tease though for him being a werewolf. It was just. I don't know. The movies must have had. They didn't have the same excuse, so they must have had to do something, right? They went right for the gore. God, you saw Barnabas at hundreds of years old and at the point of decaying and everything. I mean,
wow.
It was.
I need to watch that.
Oh yeah, and I remember seeing stills of it in Famous Monsters of Filmland and stuff like that. So
that's funny. Yeah, I remember those too. I used to buy those.
Oh yeah.
You see, they were good for. Certainly, I mean, I'd look through those and I'd see monster movies that I probably never even saw, but I'd go, wow, that's really cool. And then you'd actually watch the movie and it was like, wait, that was only in 30 seconds. Because they would, again, I mean, in the old days, it was a lot of tease, and there was, they did suspense. But then when the monster was revealed, it was either really quick or it was really disappointing and quick because it was a guy in a suit or something,
Mr. Sardonicus was on Svengoolie last night, the William Castle movie. And there's a movie that's basically 90% tease and that mask and everything that covers his face. No,
well, Dr. Fibes was one that I remember actually being horribly frightened by.
Oh, yeah. That's a great movie. Oh, my God.
It did have some great gory makeup.
Yes.
Vincent Price.
Chilling. Literally, I think that might be his last great kind of monster performance and everything. Price. I mean, he made more Hammer films afterwards. I love Vincent Price. He was amazing.
Yeah.
Good stuff,
he was
man.
Good.
You're killing me. And mentioning that again, because you're only a couple years older than me. Are you interested? Did you see that Fantagraphic Books? Bill Shelley just wrote a great biography about Jim Warren and all of his.
Oh no,
magazines.
I haven't. I know Bill. I haven't. Did that just come out or?
Yeah, it's out. It came out in May.
Oh no, I didn't even see it. I'll have to look that up. Yeah, he did a nice one on Otto Binder a couple of years back that I did a cover for. Yeah,
I didn't know you did the cover. That's awesome, man. Because I had him on Word Balloon talking about the Otto Binder biography. It's fantastic. Oh yeah, and also the Kurtzman book is great too.
Right. Yeah, no, he definitely. I know he puts in his research and stuff. But the Jim Warren one is interesting because I know virtually nothing about Jim Warren except that I read all those magazines, and I always thought it was interesting that he had his the back of the magazine he was selling product.
Yes, Captain the cattle. I forget what it was called, Captain something.
Yeah, it was just like a brilliant idea. I don't know. Hopefully that helped him keep the magazines viable or whatever. But that was kind of at the forefront. I mean, really, he was kind of combining like a professional magazine with that kind of vibe of fanzines from that, where you would kind of sell stuff mail order,
Absolutely. No, I was fascinated by all the masks and, God, you could get records of old radio shows through that.
Yeah.
And 8mm and 16mm versions of classic films and everything. I mean, they're all chopped up, but that's all we had back then. Those were the VCRs those were the videos of our day.
And people really don't understand. I mean, we were so thrilled to have some stupid, even a ViewMaster. You know what I mean? It was like the ViewMaster had like a 3D thing because it was two images, and you put the thing in there and you just clicked it, and it would rotate like a little wheel of film images. But they did movie ones, right? I mean, as a kid, I think I had a couple of science fiction ones from the maybe 60s, early 60s, and I think I'm remembering something like maybe even a Lost in Space one or something.
I know I had Batman. I had a Batman with Catwoman. I remember that. And
yeah, that's right. I was going to say Batman. I was like, am I remembering right? But I had a whole box of these ViewMaster, discs or whatever, and that was such a big deal because we barely had TV. I mean, we had like black and white TVs that the screen was really tiny, and it was also, if there was a storm or whatever, the screen would get very snowy.
Sure.
Now people are so spoiled by that crystal sharp, clear, HD broadcast that it's like that wasn't like that. You could barely tell sometimes if it was a man or a woman on screen. You know what I mean? Some airplane be flying over, and there goes the reception.
That's hilarious. Yes, very sad but true. That's awesome, man. No, you're right about that. Well, that's why I am. We're literally just days away from when they announced that Mad is shutting down. I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that. I did some work for Mad. I was able to check off a whole bunch of things over my career, but back in around 2004 or 5, I got the call, and I wound up doing maybe 2 or 3 little pieces for them over, I think it was about a 6-month period, and they were, those guys they knew what they were doing. I mean, I don't know, I guess it's easy to sit back and be the armchair quarterback, but I mean, if you look at what happened to them, Mad was always kind of autonomous. They were not under any DC control when they were in New York for all those years. Right.
Once they were bought by Warner or whatever, they existed separately. They had separate offices. They had separate staff. They knew what they were doing, the guys that were making that magazine. And when DC moved to California, Mad stayed in New York for a while, and then I think it was only within the last 2 years that Mad, they just basically shut down, fired everybody in New York, and then they started up with new people in California, and I think they had some decent people, like Bill Morrison's certainly solid and knows his stuff, but basically had to start from scratch. And I don't think AT&T has any interest in print. I mean, that's just me. That's me, armchair quarterbacking.
No, and I think you might be right, but it's disappointing because that, and it's funny, I just had a conversation about this. Cracked, somebody bought Cracked and turned it into an online product, and I think Cracked has found its niche again even on the digital platform. And Mad is such a great brand and such a distinct brand. I do think you're right. I think that AT&T buying all of Time Warner and everything, or merging with them, however, it just didn't fit in their plan. And like you said, I don't know how long Bill was there because it seemed like they made the announcement. I had Bill on Word Balloon to talk about his Yellow Submarine comic adaptation, which was great. It was amazing. And I'm like, God, I hope we could talk about Mad. He goes, if you don't mind, he goes, let me kind of get my feet wet, and then we'll talk about Mad. And it was like a month later that they announced that he was stepping down. And, and so I kind of thought maybe that was when the writing was on the wall, that maybe he wasn't getting the resources he felt he needed to keep it going. Because I agree with you. When they announced that Bill was going to be running Mad, I'm like, okay, now we got a guy that gets comics and gets humor in the best way. And I mean, that's that's what you need.
He did some amazing. I mean, I think he did some amazing stuff with the Simpsons comics over the years.
Absolutely,
just funny. Some of those comics were funnier, or as funny or funnier than the show, and the show's always been a favorite.
Yes,
but I mean, the problem again, it's like this is me analyzing things because I do read. I read the New York Times every day, but I remember when AT&T was trying to buy or merge. It's pretty much a buyout of Time Warner. Mm-hmm. I mean, they kind of divested most of their print stuff. I mean, Sports Illustrated, Time Magazine, all that stuff was sold off.
That's true.
And AT&T basically their big goal was to buy Time Warner so that they could launch their Netflix, size streaming service.
Yep.
And print doesn't fit in there. And unfortunately, Mad had a TV incarnation that ran for quite a few years.
Yeah, on Fox, the sketch show.
Successful.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it was successful. It was a alternative to a Saturday Night Live kind of thing. But the comics. Think about how much an archive of great material exists. So, I mean, somebody probably said, "Hey, why are we doing new stuff? We can put out collections or whatever," you know.
Yeah, and I suspect they will, and you're right about that. Again,
it sounds like that's what their plan was, that there would still be, you know, the brand would still be there. It just wouldn't be a monthly original monthly magazine. But again, I mean, that certainly could. I've often thought this could happen to Marvel or DC. I mean,
sure.
Even if Marvel and we all love these comics, and they're making money, but the money they make is a drop in the bucket compared to what Disney or Warner are making on a movie,
sure, or even a television show. Certainly,
yeah. I mean, it's you know, the problem is they're little tiny specks in a sea of product. So, I mean, how important do they ultimately, you know, how important is it for Disney or Marvel to say, yeah, we're going to keep these characters alive, when they also have archives of material that's been done. So, you know, you do have to wonder at one point where, you know, what you need someone who's a champion, basically. And if you have no champion for those things, you're really kind of, I think you're at risk.
In the way that Paul Levitz was back in the late 70s when they were considering that. And am I thinking correctly that Paul kind of let the powers that be know at Warner? So look, this is like your IP laboratory where we can create new ideas and that they will be exploited on TV and future movies.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, there's still that argument you can make for kids want their own, you know, version of something. You don't want your grandfather's comic character necessarily. You want, you know, whatever is big when you're a kid or what have you. So there's certainly a compelling reason to keep producing material, because, you know, otherwise stuff does become just nostalgia. I mean, I always felt like that was the biggest problem with trying to bring Shazam into the then current 90s, was that he had kind of always, you know, from the 50s on really had become nostalgia because he hadn't been published regularly. It had been you know, the type of thing where, maybe my dad used to read it, or my grandpa knew about it or something, you know, but it wasn't like, you go to the newsstand and pick it up yourself, you know. That impacts. I mean, the Phantom or Mandrake the Magician or whatever may be viable characters to adapt for a movie, but they haven't been published in any major form for a young audience in years. So, you know, I do think there's still a compelling reason to do new comics and things like that. But, you know, companies just look at it as an IP, that it's intellectual property, and Disney, Marvel, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of characters in their library. So, you know, for them, is it worth publishing these things when you can just dust one off and maybe put it in a movie and, you know, spend $100 million to promote it? You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, man, I know. And I used to think that specifically King Features I thought was very stingy. And Street and Smith with Doc Savage was stingy, where they have these great concepts. And I do think that it took the maybe the Chris Nolan movies with Batman, and also obviously all the Marvel movies, where finally they woke up and are like, oh yeah, you know, maybe we should get into this, and maybe we should start thinking about not only making movies and TV but comics again, because it just seemed like forever, or maybe the licensing fees were just too high. I don't know, but it just seemed like you said. I mean, I remember in the 80s a few times when DC would revive the Phantom and we'd get great comics and stuff. Did you ever work on those Phantom comics?
Nope, but I remember when Dennis Janke was inking the Phantom over Joe Orlando's pencils. I remember seeing those when that was happening. I think that was even post or concurrent with Watchmen, maybe a couple of a year
around that time. Yeah. No, I remember that series
because Orlando had done didn't Orlando had something to do with maybe the Tales of the Black Freighter or something, and there was something.
Yeah, I had heard that too. Yes, that he did work on the Watchmen pirate sequences, the Tales of the Black Freighter, something with that. And in fact, I think they invented in their back matter text pieces that Joe had worked on those pirate comics. So yeah, I think
it's possible. Yeah, man, I don't want to take that away from Dave Gibbons if he just basically aped, you know, a Joe Orlando style, which is entirely possible.
Sure.
But anyways, I know Joe had gotten a little bit of a little bit of a boost from some of that because he'd been editor for so long. He was a super nice guy, by the way. I like Joe. He was one of the first guys I worked for at DC.
That's cool. Yeah. Tell me about that. Yeah, because I'm assuming you did you work on anthologies where you do short stories for him?
Not that as much as that. He's in charge of licensing back in the time when I first got to DC. So he was the guy putting together the coloring books and the puzzles and things like that. And he had, I think Joey Cavallari at one point was in his little group. Andy Helfer was in his group. Terry Cunningham, who became the managing editor at one point. Mm-hmm. But it was a nice little, I think even Karen Berger might have come out of there. But it was a nice little group of just like licensing. Well, Joe still edited some of the Ghost books or House of Mystery or whatever, but that's how I knew him and met him, and he was just a super cool guy.
That's cool. No, that's awesome, man. I know. I appreciate the various people that you got to work with over the years. I mean, it's it's pretty.
Well, I mean, it's kind of boggling my brain once in a while when I think about it because I really did. I mean, there's a lot of people that as a kid that I would have loved to have worked directly with. Like I was a big Marvel fan, so John Romita Sr., Jack Kirby, John Buscema,
sure.
Don Heck, Gene Colan, all those guys would have been cool. And I did get to work with a bunch of them, so it was kind of a neat thing. Even if it was one thing here, one thing there, it was like it was kind of nice. I got to ink one John Buscema Thor issue back in I think it was around 98 or 99. So it was all these little things, you just check them off. The one that I always missed was I'd gotten an offer, and I just was too busy. It was when Gene Colan was doing Detective Comics, and they needed someone to ink an issue really quick. And I got pencil copies of the whole issue, which I saved to this day.
Wow!
But, I always wished I could have done it, but it just at the time it's like, oh, he's doing 2 books a month. I'll get another chance, and it never happened. So,
jeez, yeah, his DC stuff was really, really great, and and it was just a short window compared to the Marvel work, obviously.
Yeah.
But no,
he was one of the. I mean, as a kid, I was a big Daredevil fan. And
yes,
he was the Daredevil guy for me, at the time, and it's like I said, it's interesting when you think about those aspects. I got to work with Gil Kane on Power Shazam. I got to.
Oh, I never knew Kane did a Shazam. That's great.
Yeah, he did a fill-in, a Captain Marvel Jr. story, and again, it was fun to talk to him and get, I had not realized he said his first professional work was for Fawcett.
Wow.
He was doing these backup stories and again, little connections with people who are your, heroes is always kind of fun.
I bet, man. No, that's amazing. I love Gil Kane. I have his name is Savage, the graphic novel for listeners who don't know what we're talking about. I know you know what I'm talking about, but it had that painted cover where it was blatantly Lee Marvin on the cover,
right.
And I love that I have that because I love the story, and I know Archie Goodwin helped him with the story and everything. It's such a great violent '60s comic, and also I love Wally Wood's stuff that he was doing, I can't remember the name of it right now, but I have it digitally.
His self-publish, or the stuff that he was publishing through Wits End, or the maybe Canon. And,
it was Canon. Yeah, because I like the Wits End stuff, but I really do love the action stuff. And Canon is very politically incorrect in every possible way.
Sally Forth as well. I mean, it's basically a female character who loses her clothes in the first couple panels. But those were done for the military.
Yeah.
And it ran in a military newspaper, I guess, and then he collected them up as books or comics or whatever. But yeah, you know what? Here's something I do think about a lot. I think about how, when you mentioned Gil Kane with his name is Savage, it was Gil did that with. He also did Black Mark.
Yes.
Those were both kind of, these guys were all trying to do what ultimately became the direct market.
Yes.
There just wasn't a direct market. So they were trying to do creator-owned material, stuff that would kind of maybe give them a boost out of the trenches of monthly comics where, you basically don't own anything and you're working under, other people's directives and stuff.
Yeah.
So. But Gil did that, and obviously Steve Ditko did that. Wally Wood. Wally published a lot of the Ditko stuff initially in Wits End, It's just kind of neat, again, thinking back on how these guys were they were kind of working this groove that maybe even 10, 15 years later they would have been able to make money out of, with the direct market.
Well, and also, I always
But they were trailblazers.
Absolutely, they were trailblazers. And I wonder, if things like what Dennis Kitchen was doing with the underground scene was too underground for them. I don't know, because it is, like you said, it was kind of around that same time that Crumb and those guys were cranking out their underground comics and everything.
Yeah, and Wood did more of that. Wood did some adult stuff, and he did he did some kind of. Do you remember? Oh man, I remember as a teen mail ordering these things, but I think he did something called Big Apple Comics, and then he did that Whammo, that gigantic comic, which is about 3 foot tall by 2 feet wide. He's got a lot of material in it, not all him, but it basically was the world's largest comic, and it was published by Whammo, the company that did the toy stuff.
The Frisbees and everything.
Yeah.
Wow, no, I didn't know about Whammo. Big Apple, was that Flo Steinberg's imprint, or is that a different Apple?
I think that was, it was
okay.
Flo, and I think Ralph Reese and some other people had stuff, maybe Larry Hama. But again, that era, I think those guys were probably outside of Wood, who was willing to do nudity, and he had fun with that
right.
stuff.
Oh, sure.
I think the other people were all there was a division, probably more of an age thing, that they were not going to go blue.
Right.
So I think that the Will Eisner was an unusual case, because I think Dennis Kitchen just really loved Will, and Will took a big gamble on Dennis to work on some of the spirit stuff. But I think, again, Eisner was a good businessman, and he obviously saw, hey, these guys actually have come up with an alternative way around the companies. It's just that the distribution wasn't that. I don't think it was, selling through a newsstand, which, Dennis was still trying to do, Dennis Kitchen, is a tough business, and you could do it if you're publishing 30, 40 books, because it's all small amounts that add up. But if you're just publishing one book every month or 2 months, you're going to have a harder time chasing down your money,
Yeah, absolutely. No, and breaking into those syndicates that were literally syndicates that were running distribution and stuff like that.
Yeah.
No, it was a tough business. I hear. Well, and again, that's what kind of made it frustrating for Kane, I know, with Black Mark and Savage.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
No, I'm completely fascinated by that entire period. I finally had Dennis on at the end of last year, and he was
cool.
great. And I know and I look forward. Again, he's going to be a Terrificon, so I'm looking forward to seeing him. Yeah, he'll be there. Chaikin is going to be there as well.
Oh, cool.
So,
I didn't realize Dennis was going to be there.
Yeah, it surprised me too. Mitch told me, and I was like, oh, that's great,
I haven't seen him in a couple of years. Yeah. I used to, because he was, we're both from Wisconsin. He obviously...
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, and when I was a kid, I would say an early teen, he put out a free newspaper, it was a free, free weekly, and I forget what it was called, the Bugle or something like that. That was available at newsstands, liquor stores, whatever.
Sure.
It was kind of it wasn't a penny shopper. It was actually, it had content, and it was kind of underground-ish content, but not too adult. And you could get it for free, I think, at any drugstore, because he sold advertising and stuff.
Wow.
But that was running in the, I want to say, early 70s, maybe 73, 4, 5, because I remember picking it up every week when I'd go searching for whatever comic didn't make the main newsstand. I'd be in every drugstore possible.
I hear you, man. Me too.
Looking for Amazing Adventures number 18 or something like that. The quest was always, I think people lose that sense of the quest when you're a kid. It was such a driving thing to get on my bicycle in the middle of a snowstorm and ride my bike, in November or December in Wisconsin, freeze your butt off to try to hit some drugstore that was maybe 15 miles away that might possibly have, whatever comic didn't hit the main newsstand downtown.
Patton Oswalt actually wrote a great article like that a few years ago, and saying exactly that the geek culture today doesn't appreciate the hunt that we did have to go through. And no, you're right, man. For me, even living in suburban Chicago, I would still, depending on what they were selling, have to go a couple towns over. on my bike. I did the same thing, man. Absolutely. And then, especially when I got into old time radio, there was a great store that sold the vinyl records.
Cool.
Yeah, just about 45 minutes away on bike and stuff like that. And yeah, man, and many a time I'd have a flat tire and walk the bike back home. But it was worth it.
I remember my mom didn't drive, so we always had to, either my aunt would somehow, if you'd convinced her, please take me somewhere or whatever, to look for comics or whatever. But it was always kind of the adult, do I have to do this? but there, speaking of old radio, in Milwaukee there was a nostalgia store, basically an upscale junk store called the Good Old Days. And the Good Old Days was on the north side of on Wisconsin Avenue, 27th in Wisconsin or whatever. And they had, the guy who ran it was Dale Meneses. Dale was just a, old-fashioned trader, trader, Trader.
Yes.
He would get stuff, he would sell stuff. He also had comics, and the guy who ran the comics for him, Ron Killian, opened the first comic store in Milwaukee as an offshoot of that. But anyways, the Good Old Days, they had old newspapers, old magazines, radio, all that same stuff you're talking about, the antiques, what have you. It was just really an amazing place to go as a kid. And I would go, and I remember very vividly with birthday money, finding this place, because someone at my high school had said, "Oh, you like comics? They have old comics at this place." So I went there, after Thanksgiving, with birthday money. I must have had $20. I felt rich, and found the place on a Saturday afternoon. And let me tell you, my aunt drove me there, and she was with me in the store. I was maybe, I want to say, 13, and it was 4 p.m, and this Dale is just drinking from a bottle of Jack Daniels or something, and so you learned really quick that if you were buying comics, you'd sort through bags or boxes or whatever, and you'd find something. You always you'd have to go to Ron or Dale for pricing.
Oh,
because they weren't marked.
Oh, okay.
So after maybe just 1 or 2 trips to this place, you realize that you would find your books, and then you would try to avoid Ron because Ron knew what the books were worth and the price guide, whereas you go to Dale, who had a couple of drinks in him, and you get a break. He would just go, $5, that type of thing.
That's
as opposed to, well, the price guide lists that at $4.49 for near mint. It was just a funny thing. But so with my birthday money, I bought 3 beautiful condition copies of Wally Wood's Daredevil.
Excellent. Wow.
It was the Daredevil in the yellow costume, the first one in the red costume.
Daredevil number 1.
And those were
oh my God.
That was such an amazing, amazing thing to me, but I really had to convince my aunt to bring me back after she saw these guys drinking. She was like, I don't know if that's the place for you.
That's fantastic. Absolutely. No, man, I had stores like that too in Chicago growing up. And in fact, even more recently, I'm on a great stretch of Chicago, Belmont Avenue, and there are tons of great antique furniture stores, and they have old radios and old TVs and things.
Right.
And this one place in their basement, they had a bunch of old black and white Conan magazines from the early 80s, but they were beyond reader copy. I mean, they were so barely held together. And I came up with 5 of them. And really, I mean, they were shredded. They were horrible. I mean, I just wanted to look at them and look at the ads, and you could smell the mold on them. I mean, they were in horrible condition. But yeah, I go up, and the young guy, he's like, "Oh, they're $10 each." I'm like, "No, they're not." And he goes, "What?" And I go, "Dude, these are barely held together. I'll give you $1 for each of them. How about that?" And he called his father, and he's like, "Yeah, Dad, guy's giving me the business. I want to charge 10. He wants to do $1. He goes, "Tell him $1.75 each." And I'm like, "Fine."
So you feel like you came away from
I mean, and again, now I'm an adult, and I'm like, yeah, no, they're not. I'm like, give me a break, dude. I go, these things, if anything, are another reason why there's too much mold in this place. I'm doing you a favor taking them away from you. You're welcome.
The comic collectors, that's patina for a comic collector is smelling that mildew.
Kind of is, sadly, right?
There's a slightly different smell from comics that were kept in an attic versus in a basement. They're still mildewy, but they have a different
Oh yeah, man! I remember watching a Pawn Stars episode. Big difference. And somebody brought in old comics, and they said the basement they kept him in, like the bags, the Mylar bags and stuff were yellow, and they're like, all right, this guy must have been a smoker that had these things. He goes, oh yeah, he's a big cigar smoker. He goes, yeah, this stuff reeks of tobacco, man. He goes, I can't take these. They're just too damaged. And you're right. I mean, no, man, I guarantee you 9 out of 10 comic stores like, yeah, we'll take them. You know, we'll find it. We'll find a home for them. Don't worry about it.
Put them in a box with some baking soda. They'll absorb the smell.
That's a good idea, actually. Shame on me. I should have done that.
That's what they do. It's a good trick for pretty much anything that's got that mildewy smell.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. No, very
baking
good.
soda absorbs it a little bit, at least, you know.
This is good. This is the Heloise section of the program and stuff with our
right.
household hints.
Well, you know, here's another one. Speaking of the the hints,
please.
This is a good one. Before the days of comic restoration,
yes,
I was a kid, and being a Daredevil fan, I was at this little flea market kind of, you know, a used store, you know, used stuff. It had multiple things, but the guy had grocery sacks, grocery bags full of comics, nothing organized. You have to go through like maybe 15 bags every time you went in there because something could be moved around or something new could show up.
Sure.
So I did this. I'm going through the bags, and he has got like a little pile of books that he just bought from somebody for peanuts. And I'm kind of looking over to see what he's got. There's a Daredevil #1. Now, this would have been like 1973-ish.
Okay.
But it was still a Daredevil #1,
sure.
And it was really beat up, and I saw him rip the cover off. He said, this is a coverless, because the cover was really pretty beat up.
Oh, my God.
And I went, I'll buy it. So I bought it from him for like maybe $5. And I took the pieces, which he just basically ripped the binding part of the cover. So
okay.
I took that home with me, and I patched in paper, and I drew with my markers and restored this cover to one piece because it had a big corner ripped out and stuff. And I still have that, which is just really funny because every time I look at it, I think, oh, you know, but it's a Jerry Ordway restored.
This is true.
issue.
Wow,
Daredevil #1.
Yeah, this is the only time Bill Everett and Jerry Ordway probably worked together, so that's fantastic. Wow. That's awesome. You know, I love that specific issue. I mean, and like you said, and I misspoke earlier because Wally did the subsequent issues. So the early, and like you said, when Daredevil was still in his yellow costume.
Yeah.
But that first Bill Everett is so noir, and it is so bleak, and the Fixer, and Jack Murdoch, and everything. I mean, it's the setup. I love one of my favorite boxing movies, Robert Ryan. I mean, it's so great. And, it's just, I mean, it really is iconic. And I love Bill Everett, and I know, you know, obviously he gets his due for creating Namor, Submariner, and everything. But, you know, it's like, and sometimes people do forget. It's like, oh, yeah, whatever happened to Bill Everett? It's like, well, actually, you know, Stan kept giving him opportunities. And you know, I know he had a bad drinking problem, too.
He was a pretty bad drinker.
Yeah.
That was the problem.
But, I mean, my God,
he got
mid-70s.
He certainly got a lot more opportunities, I think. You know, you think about, like, how Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were treated. Well, I mean, he actually kept getting opportunities from Marvel and Stan Lee and whoever. Roy was a big fan and a friend of Everett's as well. And, I mean, they at least respected the fact that this guy brought an iconic character to life in the begining of comics, you know?
Totally.
So he did get that. But that first issue of Daredevil was apparently inked by a bunch of people. I'd heard about this. If I looked at it now, maybe you could, you know, pick out maybe pages by other people. But I'd heard this a couple of years ago that I think Evan Neer or somebody had said that it was one of those deadline things because that's why Bill Everett only did the one issue. It was, you know, horribly late, and then they wound up having to pass it out to like 10 people to, you know, to get it done in time or whatever. But yeah, that first, everything is in that first issue. I mean, you know, every element that we love about Daredevil is in that first issue.
Totally. Foggy's there, Karen Page is there, you know, I mean, everybody. And then I love that they kind of retcon that the Fixer is working for the Kingpin, and also just that Frank Miller transformation of the Kingpin from being that goofy Spider-Man villain to suddenly a dead serious mob boss that, you know, has his figures in the legitimate world as much as in the criminal world. Yeah. No, I love that stuff.
Actually, and we were speaking of Joe Orlando. Well, Joe Orlando is the guy who did issues like 2 through 6 or something. Joe penciled those issues, and then Wood, I think, started with maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Man,
yeah.
No, that's
the
amazing.
Orlando, but it was inked by Vince Colletta, so it was nothing to write home about.
I understand. I got to be honest, especially when I read some of his Wonder Womans and stuff, and I know that, the sins of Vinnie Colletta are enormous and everyone knows them, but I do like his art style, and I mean, he was a great good girl artist, and I know his romance comics and things like Wonder Woman, it's like, he was really good.
Yeah. Well, he was, I saw, I'm going to name drop, but
no, do it.
I saw Mark Evanier at Heroes Con, and we had dinner one night, and we were talking about, because it always winds up coming up to Vinny, because Mark is the Kirby guy.
Keeper of the Flame, absolutely, yeah.
It is interesting, because the stuff that we, as fans, or readers, or whatever, we weren't even privy to the fact that Vinny was erasing backgrounds and blacking out stuff and in Kirby stuff. He was basically editing out things. I mean, he could try to justify it, like, oh, there was too much here or whatever, but that was something Kirby put up with, because Kirby really never looked at the inks. I mean, he would have copies of his pencils, which is why all these copies existed for Tomorrow's to Kirby Collector.
Yes, the magazine.
Every time Jack would do a job, they would make photostats. Before they had copy machines, they made photostats of the pencils for Jack so that he had reference because he's doing the next issue. And, that's basically when the books were printed, he was already, he was done with it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The last he remembered is how he penciled it. So it was he wasn't even aware of the stuff that Colletta was dropping out or that he was taking out of there. And that only became an issue when, I guess, he became aware of it. It's like, hey, what's this guy doing?
Wow.
But I mean, Colletta was the other thing that we were talking about, with Mark and I were talking, was that Colletta was the guy that was great on somebody new, not for maybe if you were the new young penciler, it wasn't great, but Vince could take a job, do it quickly, but it always had a consistent look.
Yes.
And he was so identified with Marvel, really, in that period of the 60s and 70s, that he could take anybody who was maybe even rough around the edges and maybe distinctive, but rough around the edges, and he would kind of sand off all that extra, and it still looked like a Marvel comic. Yep. So there was certainly a value to a guy like that, because he'd be able to turn the job around fast, and it was still a professional-looking job. But he would definitely, you'd lose whatever distinctive quality if some new guy was around, or even, the older guys like George Tuska, or he was better on guys like that than he would be on, say, Gene Colan, who threw too much depth and things like that. Gene would pencil with the side of his pencil to indicate shading.
Yes.
So I mean, a guy like Tom Palmer was really the first guy to adapt that shading into Zipatone as a totally separate, like a gray, rather than trying to fill it in. So I mean, that's why it's tricky. So Colletta was decent. I liked the stuff on Thor when I was a kid.
Sure. I
remember liking the Thor stuff over Kirby. But, for example, Colletta did maybe a couple issues of Fantastic Four right before Joe Sinnott came on in the issues in the 40s with the Inhumans. And those issues are terrible looking because it just wasn't, I mean, it worked on Thor. It doesn't work on Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four needed that crisp edge that he didn't have.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I loved that biography that Tomorrow's put out about Vinny a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah.
I'm continue to be fascinated by those periods of the 60s and the 70s in particular, and the crusty bunkers and all those guys that would help finish, get a book on deadline when it needed it, absolutely needed it and stuff.
Yeah, well, it's right. Yeah, throwing a lot of bodies at a deadline was,
it's since day one.
That worked. Well, DC and Marvel do that. I mean, if they still do that.
Yes, they do.
I mean, they were doing a lot more, say, 10 years ago.
Yes.
And it often I would be drawing something, and I would be faced with we're going to get 3 more inkers to finish it, and I'd try to explain to the editor, it's like, hey, you'd be better off getting another penciler because you dividing up the work among 3 people. I'm not drawing 3 times as fast.
I hear you. Yeah.
So it never made sense to me in that context. But Marvel did that with a lot of X-Men books, and a lot of my friend Alvey had kind of dropped off after he had inked the George Perez on the Avengers, and I think he had a little bit of a hard time, but he was still working regularly doing those type of jobs where he'd do like 4 or 5 pages on a jam ink job, but he virtually lost any kind of profile among fans because you're not really the guy who's inking it. You're just one of 5 names in there.
I hear you, man. Well, I remember when Perez was late with, I want to say, Infinite Crisis, and that last issue finally came out. You could tell the difference. On some pages, and again, it had to get done. It was late already, and
we'll see. I'm gonna jump in and defend him.
No, and it's not. I don't blame George. It's okay. I love George.
On Infinite Crisis, the writer was late.
I believe it. I believe it. That'd be Jeff.
And again, it's good stuff. And I'm not trying to point any fingers, but Jeff Johns wrote a brilliant thing, and it was a huge story.
Great story.
But we were getting those segments of our stuff very late. That's why there were multiple artists on those issues too. Wow. Is that you had Perez doing a segment, you had me doing a segment, you had Phil. Phil Jimenez. He was drawing, technically the artist of record, but he couldn't draw all those pages if he was getting script late.
Sure.
That's just your conundrum. So I remember at one point George had even made some comment because we were like, he and I and I think Ivan Rice we were all almost like doctors on call. We knew that we had to be available, but we didn't know how many pages we'd get.
Wow.
So for that period of several months, it's like we were just waiting for the phone to ring. How many are we going to get? 2? Oh, okay. We're only doing 2 pages this month.
Wow.
Or in George's case, there was one where I think he got like something like 12 or 13 pages. And, in the old days, again, when I started in 80 through the 90s, if a book was late, it was generally because the penciler was late. In other words, it was definitely like, okay, the writer was on time because that's how comics were done back then. The script was, they always knew we need this much time for the pencil. So it was, if a book shipped late, you could blame the penciler. In the 2000s, if a book shipped late, you couldn't tell if it was the penciler or the writer. Writers suddenly were allowed to be late or run right up to the edge of a deadline, and that was a big change. I think that's still maybe the case, but stuff just being like given to an artist at a horribly tight deadline, and it's hard to do that month in and month out.
Totally, man. No, and again, it's
the reader suffers basically. The
monthly reader
they're not going to get a long run by some team because someone's having to work crazy hours and maybe can only do an issue or 2 issues and then needs a break or something. But
the other thing too, that ever since DC's Rebirth, when they were double shipping, and Marvel obviously was double shipping even, or if not completely double shipping, 18 issues a year. That's. And I've said it a million times, and it's because he told me that's what drove Brubaker out of Marvel. He's like, I can't think like that. I don't have the time to think like that. And I don't know how Tom King's doing it with Batman. And Bendis has always been a guy that tries to write ahead and to be able to do several books at once like that. But I don't know how these guys and women are able to do it. It's
insane. It's a backbreaker for the artist. You can't. The biggest issue I have and I'm saying this totally from a fan and a reader point of view, I enjoy all the books that I look back on that I enjoy were artist-writer teams doing like a long stretch of books.
Sure.
Like, someone doing 2 years on Avengers or what have you. Those were all the high points that I still look back on and go, oh, that was a great run,
Yeah.
That can't happen if you're doing 18 issues or 24 issues a year. You've immediately eliminated any artistic consistency. And I had this, actually, when talking about Rebirth, when Aquaman was relaunched, Brad Walker, I know Brad, and I like Brad's work a lot, and I remember Brad saying, I'm doing Aquaman. And, Aquaman's coming out, and it's like, wait, where's Brad? He did like 1 issue, and then he's got somebody else does issue 2 and 3, and then he does 4 and maybe 5, and it's like, that's unfair to the artist because, I made kind of I spent time on Infinity Inc. That was a co-creator thing with Roy, but in All-Star Squadron, those were books that people got to know my work consistently because I was doing a monthly book.
Yes.
And I think that's really important for an artist to break out in some way to get associated with that character and maybe make a mark on, whatever it is, Fantastic Four or Spider-Man or what have you. But it's just super hard to do that when you're one of 2 or 3 people on a book. A good example is the Bendis thing. I think the Man of Steel is a really good example. I mean, I think it hurt him. I know he probably wrote to the different people's strengths, but ultimately it kind of hurts him to write a 6 issue.
It was 6, yeah.
Man of Steel and have a different artist on every one. You know what I mean? From a fan point of view, I would rather see one guy do all 6 of those.
Well, sure.
And if it's coming out weekly, well then, hey, that's called pre-planning.
Right.
You start it 6 months in advance or whatever.
Right, whatever you need to do to get it on time and have it only be one artist. I'm with you.
And I know I'm not alone in this because I think we're all kind of anal in our brain workings because we wouldn't collect comics if we weren't. You know what I mean? There's that little obsessive compulsive thing that feels controlled. I say it feels controlled sometimes until you look in the comic closet and you go, wow, I have a lot of stuff. But continuity is important to me. All that stuff. All the books that I love are books that have that long-term continuity that you can, feel like things are building off of stories other people did. I mean that was what hooked me when I was 10 years old on Marvel Comics, with the idea that I'm reading Spider-Man number 50 and there's a footnote that says this guy first appeared in issue 33. Damn, I'm going to go find issue 33. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I know exactly.
I mean, it's like, it wasn't like, I'm never going to read Spider-Man again because I don't understand this because it started before I showed up. It was like, no, issue 33, wait, there's other issues. I'm going to go start looking for them. And that's what I did, you know?
Excellent. Absolutely, man.
But you went through the same thing, no doubt, right?
Yeah, no, I did. And you're right about that. And as I got older, and recognizing the needs or the changing needs, I just kind of rolled with it. And for me, it's story and it's storytelling. So as long as the artists that are doing it are good storytellers, the switching doesn't bother me like it used to. Yeah. But I agree with you, man. No, I mean, good Lord.
Here's the thing. I mean, and again, maybe some stuff is different if it's not done the old Marvel style. But Marvel style was plot, and the artist could adapt the plot. Now, when an artist is adapting a plot, that's basically not just storytelling, that's actually writing.
Right.
It's visual writing.
Right. So absolutely. 100%.
The part that I always liked, and again, the pencilers that I always liked, they could take something and make it something that was halfway between what the writer intended and what they intended. And the same is true like when I was drawing stuff versus when I wrote for other people. Like when I was writing Superman and Tom Grummett was drawing, Tom always brought something different to the plot that I wrote. And that's why you collaborated.
Yes.
You know, because I could say, hey, maybe this happens and this big fight happens in a grocery store or something, and it could be as simple as Tom coming up with a different thing, like I don't want to draw a grocery store, whatever it is, but that collaboration is like, it's basically improv. It's like throwing lines back and forth, and something comes of it that's better than what either of us would have done individually.
Absolutely. Yes.
So that's the fun part of it, you know, and that was always the fun part of, you know, for me, even working with Roy on All-Star Squadron, was that, you know, it was kind of a quest to try to fit everything in that he wanted, but I knew that I could throw in my own ideas, and I could, you know, I certainly could choreograph a fight scene and, you know, add character bits to a character that he was writing because you're acting visually, you know?
Sure.
So that's the thing I think that gets kind of shortchanged a little bit when you have, you know, multiple artists on an individual storyline, a single storyline or whatever, is that you're not getting the artist isn't getting the correct amount of input, and that input over, you know, monthly book becomes a flavor, and a flavor that as a fan you wind up going, wow, I really like, well, for example, I mean, the Mr. Miracle book that Tom King was doing with Mitch Gerrard.
Yeah, Gerrard's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a flavor that happens because those two guys are collaborating. Same with Greg Capullo and Scott Snyder on the Batman stuff.
Yep.
There's just a flavor that is different than if they're working with different people.
No question. No, I agree with that.
And that's always been the key for me as a reader. That's always been my favorite aspect. So.
Well, and I've heard Brian Bendis describe exactly what you were saying in terms of submitting, a script and then an artist changing a few things and him being thrilled with the changes, and even going to the point sometimes of pulling dialogue away or narrative boxes away and be like, no, everything is in the art. I don't need to say anything on this page. It's all there.
And I think Brian, is a good example of somebody who is an artist.
Yes.
And he did his own books. So I think when he first came to Marvel and started writing, I think he was maybe trying to be a little too controlling, and he had, I could tell just from looking at, I remember Mike Deodato had done like Avengers stuff, and there was just, like 25 panels on a page, and I think Brian was probably the first guy to go, oh, wait, this is somebody different drawing it, it's not me, and they found a balance, and again, that's another good case with a good art team.
Agreed.
Those Avengers they were doing back then it was just a nice book.
I completely agree. I loved it. It kind
of blew up when they just started doing, not him, but when Marvel started doing too many Avengers books. You know, you just kind of lost that narrative thread. Avengers was, again, Daredevil, Avengers, Spider-Man, my favorite Marvel books, and I read Avengers longer than anything, but even they broke me finally,
That's so funny. No, I get it, man. And again, you're right. It's different things, and truly we are kind of done with the long eras of a team doing, 50 issues or 30 issues or whatever. And, thank God we do get the occasional things like Mr. Miracle and then things where it's like, no, these 12 issues belong to these two guys, period.
Well, but there's also a different, the companies are different now.
Yeah.
The companies, unfortunately, like when I was doing Shazam, a good example, I was doing Shazam, it lasted basically 4 years, the regular monthly comic. And in the 4 years' time, I think we wound up having to address or deal with maybe 5 or even 6 crossovers, like big, company storyline.
Yes.
And that's really hard to do, but at least those were kind of contained. Now, Marvel and DC seem to go from one crossover to the next, which to me, those things upset the status quo so much that I think you lose the thread of whatever you're reading.
Yes, I agree.
If it's a major book, it's going to be somehow impacted by whatever the big crossover is. So stuff like Mr. Miracle or some of the smaller books, like the Terrifics, can be more enjoyable because they're less affected by the big, the big company crossover things. And the same is true of Marvel. Some of those things are, some of them spin out of other storylines and they go from crossover to crossover. That's more than I want to deal with.
I completely agree.
I'm not their,
yes.
I'm not their target age group. No,
neither am I, man. I get it, and again, it's like, okay, they're in the midst of a status quo thing. I like Doomsday Clock. I do like it as a story. Yeah. There are other elements that they're kind of throwing out there right now that I'm just like, that it's hitting all these other books, and it's like, oh God, let these books breathe. It's one thing when it does, it involves the Justice League. Well, actually, and I'm about to disagree with myself where I was going, because I always say that poor Dwayne McDuffie got so short shrift when he was briefly writing the Justice League Monthly because it was in the midst of Straczynski's Superman and Wonder Woman run, so you can't have them. And there were all these rules of why you couldn't have certain characters. Batman was unstuck in time from Final Crisis. And so, again, he had to get inventive, but it got to the point where he's like, well, can I use Hawkman? No. Can I use the Atom? No. Well, who can I use? Well, you got Zatanna, Plastic Man, and the Elongated Man, because every book needs 2 stretchy heroes. And it just was this misfit JLA. And again, Duffy, made the best of it, but it was like, Jesus, you're not letting this guy who obviously proved himself on the animated series writing so many great stories. It's like, let him write some Justice League. And it's like, okay, can't this be before this terrible crisis began or whatever the event is? Can't Justice League do its own thing? And occasionally they will break their own rules and allow that to happen, but it's very rare. And I loved when Marvel would do that. I know during Civil War, it was during when Brubaker was writing Daredevil. And Quesada and company are like, we're going to let Ed do his thing. He doesn't have to really conform to Civil War. When Daredevil shows up, other writers will handle it, and it won't be addressed in the Daredevil Monthly. And it's like, good. Daredevil needed to be its own book. That's great. Have you kept up with Daredevil? I know you said you're a fan. I mean, have you?
Honestly, I read when Mark Waid and
and Chris Samney.
Before Samney was my brain's going.
Marcos. Wasn't it Marcos Medina or? And I could be confusing it with.
No, the guy. I think Marcos Martin may have done some stuff,
maybe it was
but there was
Martin. Yes.
Shoot, and he's going to be mad if I forget his name. But anyways, I liked it during that run, and I felt like it felt like they kind of bridged a little bit of the pre-Miller Daredevil.
Yes.
With the Miller Daredevil,
Absolutely.
which I liked.
Yes.
Because, I mean, and you know who else did this? I mean, we talked about Carl Kiesel did a very brief run of Daredevil back, I think, after he had left DC and gone to Marvel in, like, the late 90s or something.
Oh, no, I didn't know about that.
He actually was the first guy to kind of, like, try to walk it back to the more fun Gene Colan.
Oh, no kidding.
You know.
Yeah.
And he only did a couple issues, but he had written a couple of really nice, fun kind of just, again, it was like trying to walk it back from the really grim, gritty
I'm with you.
Miller stuff.
Oh,
and it was fun. It was fun. But again, I think, the Chris Samney's terrific as an artist. I love his stuff.
Oh, God, yeah.
Evan Shaner, another guy.
Love Doc Shaner. He's amazing.
Really solid.
Absolutely. A lot of fun to read his stuff. And of course, like you, a huge Captain Marvel fan as well.
Well, the distinction is both those guys are really compelling storytellers.
Yes.
In other words, they choose angles, panel. Just the whole thing is like they're bringing it. And
I'm with you.
that's. I wished Evan was doing the Terrifics. I mean, I know DC jumps these people around way too much, but Evan was doing. He's going to do the Terrifics, and I was like, I really liked what he did, and I think the guys they've had doing it is still good, but I would have loved to seen him do 12 issues of that. You know what I mean?
I do. No, I agree with you, man. And I also don't know. He may not be a guy that can handle a monthly schedule either, frankly. And I mean, I think he might be even admit to that.
I think he was doing it. I think they were just jumping him around. Like he did an issue of Man of Steel, and that like real soon after the Terrifics had launched.
That's true.
And it was like, oh, he's going to go back to it, but then it seems like sometimes people wind up being the utility outfielder that gets thrown in, here and there, wherever he's needed, and then ultimately it kind of hurts if they had a prime project that they wanted to do. They don't get to do it.
He did an issue of the Marvel Family in Multiversity for Grant Morrison. And that was a great.
I remember I think he and Jeff Parker did the Convergence.
Yes.
Ones.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Jeff's another guy, a writer that gets the old style and everything. I mean, all of his Batman 66 stuff was amazing. Yeah. And I loved it.
Jeff, I met him I think 2 years ago at maybe Baltimore or Heroes, one of those. And he and I had fun chats. We did a Shazam panel too. It was kind of funny.
Oh, that's cool.
Coming from different perspectives. That was a funny panel last year at Heroes. It was also Kevin McGuire. Kevin sitting way on the end, and people asking questions about Power Shazam or whatever. And I'm just going on because that's what I do.
Yeah, no, this is good. Absolutely.
And Kevin leans in and he goes, wow, I never really even thought about that when I was drawing it. That sounds kind of fun to do.
Oh, that's funny. Wow.
It was just funny.
Jeez. I got to ask, did you see the movie?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I liked the movie.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I did.
I liked it, too. Again, it can't be, I guess, the classic origin and some elements you can't keep. I'm very divided about how I feel about this gigantic Marvel family.
Yeah.
That they've introduced.
I think they did it well, and I like the fact that the fans who saw the movie before me kept it quiet because it was a fun surprise.
Me too.
Here's the thing. I didn't care for the New 52 Shazam. I'm a huge fan of Gary Frank. I'm a huge fan of Jeff Johns. I felt like it was too dark.
Yeah,
and
I hear you.
I totally understand them doing it, but I thought it was too dark. The new series kind of corrects that to me. It course corrects it. It's still their same premise, but it's much more fun. Yeah. And I think the movie fits in that, in that same groove, basically. It vibes on, I think, an observer of the movie, it vibes totally on the Power Shazam that I did in the '90s. Tonally, it vibes on that.
Agreed with that. Absolutely.
And,
yes.
Whether it's the same origin or what have you, I mean, I have no control over this.
Well, no.
Nobody has control over it. I think in the timing of them announcing the movie to when they actually did it, when the thing first started getting scripts generated, it was going to be based on my Power Shazam graphic novels, what I was told.
Oh, wow.
And I think John August was the first writer that I remembered being connected with it. And that's when The Rock was first talked about playing Black Adam.
Gotcha.
And at this last fall, I did Baltimore Con, and they were nice enough to bring me over and introduce me to Zachary Levi, who was there as a guest.
That's great.
And he and I got chatting about stuff, and he told me that he was originally asked to audition for Captain Marvel for Shazam back when it was still when it was still him and The Rock were going to be in it.
Okay.
And he said he actually backed away from it because he thought The Rock was just going to wipe him off the screen. In other words, he just thought The Rock is, even back then when they were talking, Rock was still a big presence, and
Sure.
he's a big screen presence. So he just felt like, holy crap, I don't know if I can even be on screen with this guy without having people not even see me.
He's got incredible charisma. Honestly,
Yeah.
I have friends in sports radio, and I was on their show last summer, and one of them was griping about, we're getting another Rock movie, and he's like, I don't get it, and I'm like, you clearly don't get it because the guy oozes charisma.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
every movie, even the crappy ones, you can't help but watch him, and the guy has amazing screen presence.
Well, he's Arnold Schwarzenegger in the '80s, really. I mean, Arnold was like a master at selling those movies and at the showman aspect of it. And I think, The Rock has taken it a little further in that he's certainly an active partner in the scripts and everything else. So, I mean, he's tailoring these things to his strengths, and he's got a tremendous amount of charisma.
He's funny. I mean, he's legitimately funny,
Yeah.
and I mean that one, and I finally watched all of it. It was on Turner or something. The one where he's the quarterback, and they finds out he's got the daughter, and he's funny as hell in that movie, and he's great, and he's running around and being goofy and being the butt of jokes, and it's like. That's how, I mean, so he could pull off the action hero stuff. And certainly you're right, Schwarzenegger had his moments with Junior and Twins and things like that where he would do a comedy and was he was charming in his own way as well. I don't know, I find The Rock much more, charismatic, and I'm really impressed with him. And God, ever since they even said, Black Adam, it's like, oh please, because he is so perfect for Black Adam.
Well, and like I said, so I wound up getting to talk to Zach. Mm-hmm. And then at New York Con, I saw he was there, so I went and I chatted with him again. He's super cool. He definitely a comic fan. He didn't really know. When I talked to him at Baltimore, I said, "Have you seen any of my Shazam stuff?" And he goes, "No, Jeff has only given me his he's only given me his issues." and I said, "Well, I'll bring you the graphic novel." And then so I brought him a copy of the hardcover I had.
Oh, that's great.
And gave it to him at New York Con, and he was super cool. But I felt like I knew he was going to have the vibe for it. I was trying to defend it on Twitter for the however many, the year before it came out. I'd say, look, give this thing a chance. I think the elements seem right, and I think it was certainly the casting in that movie is like 90% of it. I mean, the kid who plays Freddie Freeman was terrific.
Very
Billy
funny.
Batson was the whole extended family was really good.
Yes,
they were all distinct.
Absolutely, no,
And,
they are. As we get older, I get more cynical about I don't need to watch a movie about kids. That said, it was a really good movie. The kids were fantastic, and both the kid who played Freddie and then Adrian Brophy playing Junior. Was great, and really, they really did a great job finding a kid and Brody to be the same character and everything.
Yeah, they definitely looked like grown-up versions.
Oh yeah,
same with Mary Marvel, the actor. When I saw it, I was like, wait, is that the same? Did she get to actually play herself? And it's like, oh no, it's a different actress.
Oh, is it? My God, wow. I thought it was the same actress.
Yeah, no, it's a different actress.
Wow. Because at first I kind of was like, oh, does Mary have to be older than Billy? And I'm like,
Right.
All right, whatever. And it worked out fine. It's fine.
But that's what I'm saying. Like you can, and again, I'm on Twitter a lot, and people on Twitter get caught up in the details.
Yeah.
And I think it's beyond that. I was talking to my daughter about this tonight. I said, there's a point where I'd like to just go on social media and say, here's the challenge for today. Say 2 positive things, or tweet 2 positive things, reviews, whatever you want. But in tweeting positive reviews, do not use a negative of something else to build that positive. In other words, this was much better than fill in the blank movie, which was terrible.
Right.
Just do the positive. I mean, we focus too much, and none of the negative stuff. I mean, a lot of negative stuff matters, obviously, in politics and stuff, but the negative stuff in entertainment is just negative stuff. I
agree with
and all it does is drag everything else down. So, like, someone can praise me but put down, I don't know, I'm just going to say Carl Kiesel because Carl's in my brain. But, you know what I mean? It's like that doesn't need to be. You could say, I like this guy's work, and I don't have to say because I hate this other guy or because he does so much better than this other guy. That has nothing to do with it. You either like something, you don't like it. If you don't like it, you don't always have to tell, you have to tell people. Like, you can have a meal at your mom's house or something, and you're not going to immediately go, wow, the meatballs really sucked. You know what I mean? You're just going to shut your mouth and eat it, right? I mean, there's nothing good to be gained by being negative at every turn.
You're killing it.
So I think that's the challenge, is to try to get positivity without, you don't have to be a Pollyanna, I mean, there's always negative stuff going on, but if you like a movie, if you like a record or an album or a whatever TV show, then like it, and don't make somebody else feel bad for liking it. That's the thing.
No, I understand, and I stand in the glass house because I've certainly had my opinions about Star Trek Discovery and not being crazy about that.
We all have, I mean, it's we've seen probably more TV and movies and it probably is good for anybody to see yet, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's hard to be surprised. It's hard to be challenged by stuff, but stuff still can surprise you, and it still can challenge you,
100%. No, I do agree with that, man. You're killing me, but you're right.
So yesterday, well, here's the funny thing. I stepped into, how you step onto a hornet's nest. Somebody posted something recently, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 days ago, and it was posted from that they want to see the Snyder cut of Justice League.
Yes, I've seen that post.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So I said, hey, I'm all for it. I would like to see what this guy intended.
Sure.
But they gave him. He had apparently had a complete enough cut. He had music. It was locked according to all the technology. There was a cut of the movie with music. That's all I need to know. I'd be curious because what came out I didn't really care for. I didn't think it was terrible, but what was this guy's intent?
Right.
Agreed. 2 years or 3 years later or whatever, it would be interesting. In the same way that I would love to see, the guy who directed Rogue One, the Star Wars movie, who was replaced for reshoots by a different director and writer, maybe his movie would have been different, maybe not better or worse, but just as an artist, I'd be curious to see what is the initial and what was the intent, and why did the studio change it for better or worse. So, anyways, I posted my positive thing for this, release the Snyder cut. And people just start jumping on this stuff like it. I mean, I'm a movie fan. I'm not telling you not to be a Republican or a Democrat or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just amazing to me. And then, like Jay Oliva,
the animating
Oliva, he did storyboarding on that, and he worked on the Snyder stuff. So he jumps in and he's like, "Hey, you guys are being mean. Jerry's just saying he'd like to see this, and you guys are just crapping on it." And I'm like, okay, I'm fascinated. For the last 4 days, I keep getting tweets in my notifications, and people are still going over this stuff. And it's funny because it's coming from both sides. So, but again, the vibe is, I do want to see this. If it exists, I think, hey, put a Blu-ray out from Warner Archive or something. Mm-hmm. What's it going to, I'm sure there's an audience for it. But people absolutely are so polarized that they can't even, it's like you can't even say you like something without getting jumped on. It's like, I like Batman versus Superman, especially the Blu-ray cut, which has more Clark and Lois.
Yeah, the director's cut version, yes.
Yeah. I liked Man of Steel. I want to like Justice League. I liked a lot of it. I just feel like they undermined their initial plan, which was going to be 2 movies, and it was going to introduce Darkseid,
right.
you know?
Yes, absolutely.
So,
yeah.
I mean, all of that, that's all I care about it. I mean, I would be curious to see it. It's not a fight I want to get into. You can dislike it. I'm not going to hate you. You can still be my friend and not like what I like.
Good. We're still friends then, Jared. It's okay.
But I'm just saying. I defended those movies for a couple of years, and it got to a point where it's like, I've said what I said. I'm still liking it, but again, I'm going to bring this back to comics.
All good, buddy. Do it.
Years ago, the same guy who opened the first full-time comic store in Milwaukee, who spun out of that other secondhand store.
Yeah.
Well, he had a place, and every Friday we would go in, and there would be this kid who was a high school student, I guess, at the time. And all I knew was his name was Little Mike. I don't know what his full name was, but Little Mike sat in this chair in the back of the store on Friday or whatever day the new comics came in, and he would complain about whatever was in X-Men that month. He would just, and it was just funny. I mean, it was like, again, it seemed innocent enough, but there was a deterrent factor. If someone came in and said, hey, do you sell X-Men comics? This guy would jump in with an opinion. It shouldn't be like that.
Agreed.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
We should be allowed to like what we want to like without somebody shaming us for it.
Totally.
You know?
No, I completely agree with that. I get
so that's what I think of. It's like the Simpsons again. Simpsons did Comic Book Guy, the comic store guy, and it was perfect because that's what this little Mike was. Except he didn't own the store. He just was there as like a, he was the mascot.
No, that's the beauty of the comic book store culture, where you do have just people that just seem to always be there hanging out. And it's like, do you work here? No. It's like, okay. It just seems like you're here every hour of the day. Okay, whatever.
But the assumption is, in the old days, if you had an opinion about something, you very likely bought the product and read it.
Sure, yes.
And the problem with the Internet is it's full of, 90% of the people are cranks who hate everything in comics, but they probably haven't bought a comic in 20 years.
Yes. Yeah, or they prejudge before it comes out, before they even read it.
Right, you're just a spoiler.
Yes.
So, you're just there trying to pee in somebody else's cornflakes.
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true. God, Robert Wool, I talked to him in May about Terrificon, and we talked obviously about the Michael Keaton Batman movie. And I know you're going to do a panel, I'm assuming, about your adaptation of it and everything. But yeah, can you imagine, again, as someone that participated in, product for the movie and stuff, I remember all the negative fan mail that would be in Amazing Heroes and Comics Interview and all those publications about Mr. Mom's going to be Batman? Why is this a good idea? And then the movie came out, and the movie was amazing. And I give Keaton all the credit in the world of coming up with a very different Bruce Wayne that worked. And it's like, that's a really interesting take. It's not something I was expecting, which is the best thing in the world, especially if you've been reading Batman all that time, to see a Batman movie and be positively surprised at what you get. And,
well, he was also, again, there you go with casting is so important. I think he was a perfect counterpart to Nicholson because Michael Keaton had that ability to project that kind of like a little neurotic kind of, energy. Mm-hmm. And that fit perfectly. To me, it did, at least with the because Nicholson's Joker was just pretty much nuts.
Yes.
But he was, it was like he wasn't, he didn't have that electricity, that aspect of it. He was just big,
Yeah.
And I thought the Keaton as Batman had a little bit of a damaged. He projected much better as a damaged guy that you would buy as a Batman guy. He's not going to be totally, adjusted because he wouldn't be dressing up like a bat.
Well, yeah, but also I just loved that he was uncomfortable being Bruce Wayne. And it really, and didn't know where he should be. He has that date with Vicky, and they're at the really long table and stuff, and he's just like, I
don't think I've ever been in this room before.
Exactly. Stuff like that. Or when he let his guard down with Nicholson, and he's like, I know who you are. And he was he was in the Bruce Wayne guys, but he was Batman. And he grabs the fire poker and he's like, "You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts." And like ready to attack him. And to me, also my favorite moment in the Batman '66 movie is when Bruce Wayne is captured by the four villains. He's in his tuxedo and just can't help himself and just starts fighting them as Bruce Wayne. And it's just, and really, as a little kid, I was like, yes, go. And really, I'm like, oh, this is, Adam West's action movie moment where he can really like let fly and not have to worry about wearing the purple to make his point. And it was terrific. I love moments like that. I think it's, I think those moments are fantastic. And always when Bruce Wayne drops the guard, and it's like, guess what? I'm not a fop. I'm the most dangerous man in this room. And those are always exciting moments and stuff. So
Geez. Well, I mean, and again, when the '89 Batman was cast, I'd moved up to New York area to Connecticut in '87. I used to go to the office regularly. I mean, I got started getting writing work because of that. That was all part of my plan, but. We had gotten invited by Jeanette Kahn to see Pee-wee's Big Adventure at a sneak preview.
Oh, wow.
And she said, this is the guy that, before the movie, she goes, this is the young director that Warner Brothers is courting for Batman.
Interesting.
That Batman's finally going to be done. And I swear, people around are like, wait, what? What are you telling us? And then once you see that movie, you realize that, Tim Burton was able to master comedy, drama. I mean, he had the look was right, and then he brought along, here comes, Danny Elfman, and doing this score that's evocative of the 30s and just a very melodramatic. I mean, I just seeing that, I was like, okay, I knew this thing would be interesting. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, everybody, friends of mine who were comic fans were like, oh, this is going to be terrible, blah, blah, blah. It's dumb to just say that. I mean, you don't know what it's going to be until it is something. So it seems like a lot of wasted effort to try to drag something down before you've seen it.
I completely agree, man.
So that was the same thing, like I said, with Shazam. I was defending that thing for the year beforehand, and I'd see the director post stuff or tweet stuff, and I'd be like, I think this guy's got the right sensibility. I mean, again. It's all these decisions are above anybody's pay scale, but none of us are making the movies. All these choices have to make some kind of organic sense, and sometimes, obviously, they pick the wrong people for stuff. But sometimes they get it right,
Absolutely.
And again, to me, the 90% of the Shazam movie is in the casting. They just, they just got the right people. So I'm looking forward to The Rock. I know they're starting to rumble about, they got a director, they're rumbling about, who the other actors are going to be and the other characters and stuff. And it looks like that what I'd read maybe a month or two ago was possibility of not only Hawkman, but also seeing Atom Smasher, who was Nuklon from Infinity Inc.
Yes.
And Stargirl. And it sounds like that storyline that Jeff did in JSA, which was really... just a terrific storyline. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember it very well. I love JSA. I always tell Jeff and Don Kramer when I see Don. Don's a local guy.
Oh, yeah, Don.
So no, I loved that story. And truly what Jeff did with Black Adam and Atom Smasher and making them friends and the whole Kendek kind of Middle Eastern problem.
Right. Well, he basically threw a wedge into the JSA, and it was just really well done. I mean, to me, it evoked the Avengers stuff that Roy did when I was a kid, that, these guys fighting each other, rather than being a all happy family,
Absolutely. No, I also liked the romance between Stargirl and Billy.
Yeah.
And Jay Garrick, like, getting in Marvel's face about it and be like, hey, what do you think you're doing? This is a kid.
You're a little old for her, aren't you, kid?
Man. And it's like, what a sad, tragic moment, because clearly Billy and she loved it. And I'm blanking right now on what Stargirl's name is, but
Courtney,
of course. Yeah,
Courtney.
And it was heartbreaking. It's like, no, these two should be together. That's a great idea. Yeah, and he's like, I can't do it, man. They're gonna look at me crazy when I'm marveled, and this isn't gonna work.
Well, and the other thing is fun is when I was a fan reading the JSA run during the 2000s.
Oh, yeah.
But the fun thing to me was that's the thing that James Robinson and maybe Goyer and Jeff, they all worked on, that they brought to Black Adam, was they basically were looking and reading the Power Shazam, because I had set up the fact, and again, I was doing it with Black Adam towards the end of the run of Power Shazam to indicate that he was kind of like a DC version of Dr. Doom or Namor, in that he was a leader and perhaps has some kind of diplomatic immunity, because as a kid I always loved that Dr. Doom could do all kinds of crazy stuff, and then it's like he'd just walk away. You can't touch me. Diplomatic immunity,
right?
Right. So that was something that I thought was a fun bit, because I had Billy and Black Adam basically head to head. Bill, you killed my parents, and Black Adam saying, it really wasn't me.
There you go.
And making a case for it. So it was fun then reading the JSA book and seeing them kind of run with that. And Peter Tomasi did it really nice with Doug Mankey. Did a nice Black Adam 4-issue miniseries that was also really effective. I think that brought back ISIS from the into the DC universe.
Right, and I mean that's what I was going to say is, and then when you made the Namor connection, that's how I felt about Black Adam. Yeah. It was like, look, under other circumstances, I'm considered a hero to my people. And
that was that's one of the few things that Alex Ross and I disagreed on.
Oh, interesting.
Because Alex really wanted he said, because he was like, we had this discussion about Black Adam too, and it was like, I think I would rather not have Black Adam have the pointy ears, because he looks too much like Namor, and he did come years after. I mean, he was invented in the late 40s, I think.
Okay.
And, clearly, that's just too close. So when I did him in Shazam, I just made him a normal guy. But I remember Alex was just like, no, he's got to have the pointy ears.
Oh, that's funny.
But I think he won out.
No,
sometimes you have to let those battles go.
I hear you, man. Well, I don't want to keep you because, God, I know it's like 9 o'clock your time or whatever. But, dude, as always, great conversation, and I love the directions we went into. I had other plans for directions we didn't get to. I like talking about the movie adaptation. I don't know if I'm moderating your panel, your Batman panel.
I have no idea. I don't know what
it's all up to Mitch.
I actually
how it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he does a lot of stuff that, like, he and I have conversations about the show, and then like 6 months later, it's like, so you're going to do this? And he's like, what?
Oh, I understand.
We talked about this. It's like he's got too many plates he's spinning.
Always. I know, man. I've in the 2 years I've known him, I've gotten that right away as well, and that's great. And truly, I do. And listeners, I obviously Terrificon's been sponsoring Word Balloon for months, and he's a great host. But I genuinely like Mitch, and I love Terrificon. It's a great show. Yeah. I can't promote it enough and remind people that, hell, if you're in the tri-state area, you owe it to yourself to go, because you're really going to get this great mix of classic creators and new creators, current creators, and the great amount, like the right amount, I think, of celebrity that doesn't overpower the comic side of the show either.
Well, he's got I kept telling him when he'd keep announcing people, and I said, you got to stop, because you got way too many good people. I mean, seriously, his guest list is really kind of crazy. He's got so many people. I mean, good creators that are coming that it's like, where are you going to put them all? Number one. But, but he does the show. Here's the thing. I mean, I've done Heroes Con in Baltimore are very comparable.
Yes.
In that they're really fun fan comic shows.
Yes.
They're not media shows.
Yes.
They're both done really brilliantly. They're just great shows. But those shows have teams of volunteers and stuff. Mitch is like really tries to juggle everything himself. He's got his family helping him, and he's got a couple other people, but it's like his personal baby. So I mean, I think year by year, I keep saying there's a point where you're going to have to delegate more, or you're going to go nuts, because it's too much responsibility.
I agree with you. No, I hear what you're saying, man, and I was really pleased when he asked me to, help him last year and then help him this year and everything. And it's like, Jesus, anything I can do, because all it gives me is a good, 8 or 9 podcasts that I can put out as well, as far as the panels that I do.
You do really well with the panels.
Oh, thanks, man.
I mean, I think the Superman one from last year was fun.
Oh, we had a blast. It was great. Yeah. Oh, no, I loved it. And I think
if you have a little bit of history with any of the comic stuff, I think it gives you a little the ability to, like, you can just pop something into the conversation and it takes it in a different direction. which is good because a lot of times, the questions can be somewhat canned, and
Sure.
You go, well, I just did a panel 3 months ago and we had the same 4 questions.
Absolutely,
or whatever.
absolutely. Well, I'm always willing to go. If we got to go full hour and nobody has a question, great, I'm ready. But if, I always try to remember, too, that, this is a lot of fans' chances to ask questions. And they might be questions that, we hear over and over again. But it's like, it's that balance of, because that's the other thing, too, is I've been at some conventions where, oh, God, we only have 20 people in the audience. And I'm like, don't worry, I'm recording this. I guarantee you 5,000 people at least are going to hear this thing.
Yeah.
And, that's the great thing about the podcast,
Evan Shaner and I did a Shazam panel, just 2 guys, right? 2 years ago at Heroes, I think it was, and we had it was a weird time. It was like a Sunday morning kind of thing.
Okay.
And there were maybe 5 people in the audience, and I looked at them and I said, "Hey, let's just go with it."
Well,
so we had fun talking to each other.
I don't know if anyone recorded that, but I hope so because I bet it was a hell of a conversation.
Well, I don't think anybody recorded it unless it was one of the 5 people. But I think those 5 people were entertained.
Sure.
I mean, it's again, you're competing against other stuff. So
no, and I get that for the weekend. Yeah, I get that for the convention. But again, that's why I'm glad that. I mean, certainly some shows can get very protective and no, that's our content, and we'll put out that panel when we feel like it. And I've certainly done my share of shows like that as well. Yeah. But I'm glad when I do have a good arrangement with Mitch, or I used to with Tony Moore's Cincinnati show that he used to do. It was no, whatever you moderate, you can record it. And even in Mitch's, even if you don't moderate it, you can record it. So I got Paul Kupperberg and Barbara Freelander talking about DC's romance comics of the 60s. And that was fantastic. It was great. That's the thing, man. I mean, as we all get older and stuff, God, we're seeing it now with the Matt closing, all those creators that aren't with us anymore. And you can only imagine some of the stories they had. And who's going to write that history? I want these stories, out there, and also for fans to appreciate them and everything. They're very cool.
Yeah, a lot of stuff does kind of go away, especially we were mentioning the Mad guys. There was a period of time when they started coming to the local Connecticut chapter National Cartoonist Society dinner meetings, and I would sit with these guys, and they were just really hilarious, obviously, but they were these guys have been doing it for years and years and years, and they knew what they were doing.
Sure.
And you could just see that sensibility coming through in the the magazine itself from that kind of just humor. I think that's, again, it's a shame. I'm glad Roy Thomas is still doing Alter Ego, and you still have Back Issue, and you still, because I do think those. I mean, it may not be important to the world at large, who drew or wrote or had some problem in 1985 on Doom Patrol or what have you, but I think it's interesting and it's good that these things are out there. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Because, again, when I was starting in comics, 1980, a lot of the guys from the Golden Age were still alive.
Yep.
And Roy had some interviews, and Steranko.
Yep.
Steranko's history, 2 volumes of History of Comics. He's got the mother load of stuff in there, and he got that, those interviews in probably the late 60s at a perfect time when these guys were all, still telling those stories probably.
No, I agree, man. Absolutely. No, you're 100% right. And in fact, the Will Eisner documentary that John Cook made had all those original cassette interviews that Will did with creators that became the book Shop Talk, and it was it used to be in the Spirit Quarterly, and then they Dark Horse collected them into the book, and God, thank God that you got Milton Caniff talking to a cartoonist he trusted like Will, and you could have this real peer-to-peer discussion about what it was like back then and everything, and all those conversations. I think it was one of the most candid Jack Kirby conversations I ever read or heard.
Yeah,
things like that.
Well, the Kirby one was interesting. I still remember reading it when it was first in the magazine. Wasn't it when he was doing the Spirit?
Yeah, it was in the kitchen sink years of the Spirit Quarterly or whatever after the Warren Spirit books.
The Kirby one is interesting because Will was his boss.
Yep.
And as much as Kirby was Jack King Kirby, it was funny in that interview. There was some aspect of him he was deferring to Will.
Yep.
in that same employee boss
Sure.
thing, which I thought was just kind of funny, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't get that if you're, you know, I mean, if a 20-year-old kid is interviewing Kirby, you're not going to get that
Absolutely.
same.
No, dude,
you know,
even me at 54, when I talk to both, you know, people my age in comics and older creators and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure they're like, yeah, kid, let me tell you what the real story is, and that's fine.
Right.
God bless them. I want them to be like that. And again, you're right. That was what made those Eisner conversations that much more special, because Eisner knew both as a studio head and also as a cartoonist himself what to ask and the truth. You know, the truth.
Yeah.
So good.
That's kind of cool. But like I said, I mean, this stuff is all. I mean, it's got to have some value. It's going to have value to somebody. You know what I mean? I think it's good to think of all the people who worked in unsung ways on. You know, I think Jerry Bales compiled his list of his who's who of people who nobody ever heard of, who worked on Superman, who were in the Joe Shuster's shop. You know, basically maybe drawing Clark Kent or Superman heads or feet or something like that. They all contributed, and a lot of those people are to this day are still pretty much unsung. You know.
Well, and even ones that did get cover work, and like the Win Mortimers of the world, people like that were in the Superman office, and you know, again, they're part of the Siegel Schuster era, but it's like no, he had a distinct style. Or writers like Alvin Schwartz. I mean, I really didn't know about Alvin Schwartz until near the end of his life, and that's when I finally kind of became aware of him. You know, people like that.
In Connecticut, like here, there were people like Gil Fox, who I would see at the cartoonist meetings, and I had no context for him. So until really, I mean, it wasn't much before he passed on, but the last couple of meetings, I was like, I think he had done interview with Roy for Alter Ego or something around that time, and I was like, wait, this guy was actually in on the beginning of comics. You know, it was kind of mind-blowing. I
hear you, man.
You know?
Did you read Cartoon County, Cullen Murphy's book?
No, that was one of those that I basically totally forgot about it. I was going to go.
It's amazing.
I was going to order it.
You'd love it. And you know, if you don't have time for it, I believe it was Vanity Fair. I forget which magazine, or maybe it was The Atlantic, because I know Cullen Murphy is an editor over there. Yeah. But there is like an article that kind of is a short version of what you get in the book, but it's unbelievably fantastic. So I can imagine. Remember, you know, I was going to ask.
I remember seeing him at John Cullen Murphy at those. You know, they were like early '90s through the '90s. I mean, I got to meet a lot of people there at those cartoonist meetings. I got to meet him. I got to meet. I mean, obviously Kurt Swan I knew and got to socialize with Kurt. It was a great guy. Mort Walker, all these guys. But the Will Eisner he gave a speech at one of them. I think must have been towards early 2000s or something.
That's when I saw him. Go on.
Yeah, and it was you know, just your chance to have a little conversation in a setting where he's going to assume you're not just a Joe Schmo. You're somehow connected to the cartooning or world or whatever. It was fun. I think again, like, you know, thinking back on that, when my wife and I were going pretty regularly in that, just for a stretch, and then we wound up kind of, you know, when the kids were kind of, once you have 3 kids, it's harder to find babysitters. you need the octopus type babysitter with multiple arms and. But it was fun while it lasted. I did get to meet a lot of these people that have now, you know, since passed on.
That's awesome, and I went to one Society of Illustrators presentation in New York. It was just a couple of years ago, and they were celebrating Marvel's pulps of the 40s and 30s. And I want to say Sean Howe was there, but Al Jaffe was there because he worked in the Timely offices.
Yeah, I met Al.
Yeah, and that was fantastic. God, you know, seeing him and telling stories about Timely in the 40s and Martin Goodman.
He's still around, though,
he
right?
Is still.
I mean, he's like 90.
Yes, he's in his early 90s. Mort Drucker is still around. He's 90.
Oh, wow.
And it's, man, it's like, because like I said, as they made the announcement about Mad, I'm like, well, who's left? DiBartolo is still around. Dick, and he's, you know, a little younger than the other guy. And Sergio, of course, is still around. Aragona's. Yeah. But Al and Mort are, you know, that's pretty amazing that they're still around. Mm-hmm. And Al was still doing the fold-ins.
Yeah, that's right. And Nick Meglin is gone, isn't he? Didn't he pass on?
I'm not sure, and I never got a chance to see him. And
he was one of the guys that that was mentioned earlier. He was just
was he
really
in charge when you got to do your stuff for Med?
No, it was Sam Viviano was the editor at that point. But I think Nick was like editor emeritus or something. But yeah, those guys all knew what they were doing. I mean, I do think, again, it's all conjecture and stuff. I don't know the number crunching and all this, but I do think having a group like that in New York, you just can't like start over. You know what I mean? If you start over, you're going to create a different magazine, and maybe that's the intent. But hey, if you had something that kind of worked versus let's start fresh. I mean, it's always harder to start fresh.
Yeah, no. I really would like to know kind of the last few years. I got to meet a couple of the people on the digital side when it was moved to Burbank and everything, and they were all very excited about the prospects ahead. And like I said, I don't know.
This amused me when I did the couple things for Sam Viviano. Sam was the guy, and I totally amazed him because I remembered this from my childhood. Sam drew a one-page thing about his visit to DC Comics, and they published it in DC Comics. He wrote and drew a page that DC published back during the Carmine era.
Okay.
So it would have been like early 70s.
Was it a plop or something like that?
No, it was a page that said it was him as a kid. It was his kid's version of going into DC Comics, and he drew this perspective shot of, Carmine Infantino going into like an extreme perspective from shoes up, and you don't even see his head, and meeting Saul Harrison and all this stuff.
Sure.
It was like a little autobiographical one page that Carmine must have liked enough, obviously, and liked the kid enough to publish his little autobiographical page about visiting D.C. Anyways, this was it could have been like late 60s, but it ran as a full-color page insert, not an ad, but like a page just for fun in the D.C. Comics.
Okay.
I want to say late 60s, but no later than maybe 70 or 71.
All right.
And it's still out there somewhere. But Sam Viviano is the guy who did it, and that name always stuck in my head because as a kid I thought, wow, a kid got to go up to D.C. and he got to do this page. So there, years later, I get a call from Mad Magazine, and I'm like, Sam Viviano, are you the same? And he's like, oh, my God, I can't believe you remember
awesome.
that.
That's fantastic.
It was just cool that he got to be not only a professional, but he wanted to be an editor at Mad,
Yeah, my few conversations with Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, I never really get into that stuff, and I'm kicking myself because I think Len would have been a little more open to talk about all that stuff.
Yeah.
And God damn it, and I know you knew him better than I did, but man, there's a guy that I had nothing but respect for, always a sweetheart of a guy, and we're all brokenhearted that he's no longer with us. He was such
Len
a
was
guy.
Len was my first editor, really.
There you go.
He really he did his best to look after me, and he was a good guy. He was definitely a good guy, and he was a good, really talented writer. I mean, he put so much time in as an editor that you kind of forget that he had. He was a good writer. He wrote some really nice of those Earth 2 crossovers when he was doing Justice
100%,
League.
100%, man. Absolutely.
He did the Hulk.
Yes.
He did a bunch of Marvel stuff that I love. So.
Well, and I was really glad at the end he was even doing some writing, and they had that one Batman Superman annual that they kind of rebooted the composite Superman. That half Superman, half Batman villain, and he wrote it, and he was pretty happy with it. He's like, I think it turned out good. Or, God, the Before Watchmen stuff, which I know is controversial, but I loved him and Jay Lee doing Ozymandias.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that was really good.
I worked with him on that DC Legacies, that miniseries.
Oh, that's right.
They did that back in I want to say it was around maybe 2011 or something, 2012 even, 2011, 10, I don't know. It was fun. He was also he was technically editing on Crisis.
Yes.
And so I mean, he was there when I first started, and at first, like, big time editor. Not only to meet him, but him to be my editor. He was a fun guy.
That's cool.
And very talented guy. Yeah.
Oh no, and I mean, my God, I loved when he talked about working at Gold Key and doing Star Trek comics and working for Jim Warren and the Marsha Brady of comics herself, Louise Simonson, back when she was Louise Jones. I mean, and I love that Jeffrey Jones documentary that was made, and there's wonderful pictures of Louise in the 70s. And she really was. I mean, my God, she was, or in the 60s, she was Marsha Brady, for Christ's sake. She really was.
No,
and he's like, would just be like, hey, do you want to do this story? No, Jim pays shit. And it's like, oh, that's too bad. We're going to get John Severin to draw it. No, wait a minute, Louise, don't hang up.
That's true. Yeah, Louise is forever memorialized as being drawn into Swamp Thing. So, I mean, it doesn't get any better than having Bernie Wrightson, draw you.
That's true. That's right. The frightened blonde girl. Absolutely, man. No, that's great. No, she and Walter are truly like the most adorable couple in the world. I love them.
Yeah.
I know I'm not
nice.
alone. I mean, my God, they can't help but be incredibly kind to all of us, snot-nosed kids that are still bothering them decades later.
That's funny. Well, we saw Louise and I. It's funny. Back in February, I went into New York City for some part of a Superman. They said it was a Superman documentary, and Louise was in. I guess she was on or being interviewed right after us.
Okay.
There was Brett Breeding was there, and Louise came in like late or whatever, and it was kind of funny because I see people like that at shows, and it's always like, oh, no time has passed.
That's great.
So it's always fun, and they're always at Baltimore too. That's kind of their regular yearly stop for sure. And but yeah, no, good people. I keep hoping. Well, I know I was trying to convince them to come back to Terrificon too. They haven't been there for a couple of years. So.
Hopefully soon. Yeah, they're wonderful, and man, Walt's great. Walter's always been tremendous with coming on Word Balloon, and we keep trying to like convince Louise, and he goes, we'll get her eventually, John. I'm like, okay, man.
Yeah, she's not shy.
No, but and that's the thing. And she has such an incredible career, and that's why I'm like, Louise, God, you're like a giant, and I would love to talk to you about everything because
Louise is a little like that. I mean, it's a little Zelig-like, where she's. You forget how connected into all these different things she is.
Yes.
I mean, the biggest one that people totally overlook is, Chris Claremont gets his credit for X-Men as he deserves, but Louise was so much a part of that.
Yes.
She was the editor of X-Men, and she was in on all of that, basically that recreation of that X-Men. Also, speaking of Len Wein, there's Len too.
Oh yeah.
When before Chris with the new X-Men and stuff.
Absolutely, man.
So
100%.
Yeah, it's a lot of history, and it's to me it's kind of cool to find. I read stuff like this, like you were saying about. I'm not a documentary guy as much, but I'm always reading Alter Ego, or I'm reading. It's just fascinating,
Totally.
Again, to share that because we all share this kind of love of comics, and you always think like you're not the only guy who ever had this problem or that problem when you're doing comics.
Absolutely, yes.
It's always fun to read about somebody who has some headbutting with editors or what have you. It's like, oh, okay.
No, you're right about that. And also just setting the record straight, because I do think that a lot of us younger readers that have become bloggers or podcasters sometimes put rose-colored glasses on those eras. And it's like, no, talk to somebody who was there. And again, I'm not saying that they're not brilliant creators and that the work was amazing, but it's like, get the reality here. Like, sometimes these were people that comics was the only illustrating job that they can get, and they, as much as they were giants and they put everything into their comics and stuff, it wasn't, Keebler elves in the tree making cookies.
Right.
And
there's still a lot of sweat in all this stuff. But the thing, here's the reality is, nothing good comes without some push back.
Understood.
In other words, like we couldn't walk, we'd be floating around without some sort of gravity or whatever. There's always got to be a force that's working against
an opposite force. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a terrible, debilitating,
cruel force. Yeah.
Drain your life force. Right. But some of those projects can be like that, and you get past them, and something good came of it, and at least you can go, well, that came out nice, but I'll never work with that guy again because, it shortened my life by 5 years or something. That's the reality of any of this, is that sometimes, terrible collaborations or terrible work situations make you, do stuff that you might not have done otherwise. So they can push you in a different direction. And then, like you said, in any job, you need something to push against, whether it's complaining about the boss or complaining about your collaborator or complaining about your editor or whatever.
I'm with you.
That's a part of it.
Yeah.
So
too much, man.
And hey, those people complained years ago, and Kurt Swan had great, he had great stories about Julie Schwartz and Weisinger and stuff, and so none of this is new,
Sure.
But people still did their job, and good things came of it, anyways.
I understand, man. No, it's amazing. Well, dude, I don't want to. I feel like I'm keeping you away too long, but come back, and we will make this more than a yearly thing. Maybe you'll come back in a couple of months, because there's always a million things to talk about with you, and I really do. You're one of those guys, man, that you're happy to share your perspective on things, and I'm glad. Because,
I'm unfiltered now.
No, it's all good, man. Absolutely. No, thank you for being unfiltered. It's all good. Don't worry, we won't jeopardize the career, Jerry. You can, if there's anything you said on,
I just won't tell you where the bodies are buried. I'll allude to bodies.
Excellent.
I just won't tell you where they're buried.
Excellent. Well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks at Terrificon, and we'll talk after hours. But as always,
cool.
Man.
Hopefully, maybe I'll talk to Mitch, and I don't know who's doing the Batman panel, but it would be cool if you did it.
He's letting me do the majority of the comics ones. So he did even say, he goes, you tell me what you don't want to do, and I let him know.
Okay.
So yeah, it's and I do want to do the Batman one, of course.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Absolutely. Well, no, thanks, man.
No problem. Hey, always fun to talk.
At the beginning of the show, I mentioned Jerry's podcast. That's the Power Cosmic podcast with himself and Mitch Halleck. Great conversation. Mitch has been on the show too, and you've heard Jerry several times, so now you know that both of them can sit down and really get into some nerd conversations and have a great time. You should check out the Power Cosmic. And of course, in just a couple of weeks, Jerry will be at Terrificon, just like me, and looking forward to seeing him, and I'm sure he will have his commission list ready for you to get an incredible sketch. If you haven't seen a Jerry Ordway commission sketch, wow, they are amazing. And it's always fun to talk to Jerry, so this was great. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your great support. If you like Word Balloon, you think what I do here is good, is it worth $1 a month? Is it worth the price of a comic book a month? If you think so, you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon and sponsor the show. Be one of the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you very much for your support, League. This Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics, who have been cranking out great books for years. I mean, Garth Ennis doing A Walk Through Hell and Jimmy's Bastards and Dark Arc from Cullen Bunn and Juan Doe and Donny Cates' Baby Teeth and Marguerite Bennett's Animosity, all great, groundbreaking books. And they keep breaking more ground this year in 2019, the year they're calling the Year of Reading Dangerously. And we've been talking to these creators about their fantastic new books. Things like Chris Sabella's Trustfall and Tim Seeley's Dark Red. Great stuff from our buddies Phil Hester and Ryan Kelly, Stronghold. But also other books like Cullen Bunn's Knights Temporal is coming up. Joe Pruitt's horror anthology, Shock. And also Matthew Klickstein's You Are Obsolete. Now in the weeks ahead we'll have more conversations with some great Aftershock creators about their books. But you don't have to wait to find out what they're brewing over at Aftershock. Go to their website, find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. More great stuff coming next week. Be sure to join me. I can't believe some of the names that I've got waiting in the bullpen to share with you this month and beyond. I know I'm going to get a lot of great content too at Terrificon in just a few short weeks away. So make sure you join us. This is going to be a great summer here at Word Balloon. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2019.